All right, we're live.
Welcome back to the Gentleman's Gazette and our live stream today with questions about overcoats. Hopefully I can be helpful, provide my 2 cents. As you may know, and you may have checked out our video about my overcoat collection, I probably have 20 of them or more, so I'm a big fan. To start, first things first, we have at the end of the live stream, just for our patrons, we'll do an extra live stream that is much smaller, where we talk about whatever you want to talk about. But it's something that happens right after this live stream. So if you're interested in getting to know me more, or get more questions answered, or learn more about a Gentleman's Gazette, this would be a good time to sign up for Patreon. You can do so on our website, gentlemansgazette.com/patron. They'll also share the link in the chat here so you can see that. And no, it's not me typing it. We have a whole team of people answering all the questions, because if I would try to answer to all the questions that would come in, I probably could do 1 out of every 100. Yeah. So I really like vintage trench coats and overcoats, but I'm stocky and 5'7" tall, so I worry that I look silly in a full-length overcoat. Any thoughts? I can relate to that, because when I have an overcoat on that is like full-length, which means ankle length, it always looks a bit weird at first, and I feel like Hercule Poirot, because it's just not something we're used to, right? But there used to be a time when overcoats were always that long, and that was just the standard. So I think that's just a mental barrier you have to overcome. If you're still not comfortable with it, I guess, going with a knee length is definitely a better way to ease in and then slightly get something longer and longer over time until you're comfortable wearing it. I'm 6 foot tall, and I have very few ankle length overcoats. Now I live in Minnesota where it's really cold, so it makes sense to have overcoats that are that long. But unless you have them custom made for you, they're just hard to find. Any modern brands you recommend for buying heavy full-length overcoats? If not, what vintage brands you recommend to look at? The biggest issue I find with modern overcoats is just they lack the weight and the heft. They're just super flimsy, and I don't like them. I mean, I like the look of them, right? You look at, Suit Supply and Spear & McKay on the lower end. They all offer some kind of overcoat, and the pattern is, a Donegal, tweed, herringbone, very classic, very cool, but it's not something that when you wear it is actually warm. Like, you're just freezing. In terms of overcoats, I had in brands, vintage brands, there's tons of them. Ideally, you ask people how heavy it is, because that makes a huge difference. If I look at my collection here, right, I can show you a few. This, for example, is an older herringbone, and this was just like a no-name brand from Germany that you couldn't find. English brands that you could find online would maybe be Chesterberry. I had an old Geeves and Hawkes British warm overcoat, and I wrote a little piece about it, so you can check it out later. That's a really good brand. Otherwise, if you can find, sometimes department stores. I have this one here. Which was from a department store called, Marshall Fields. That used to be a nice department store, and this is a nice, Donegal tweed overcoat, peak lapel, kind of half belt in the back. Just a beautiful piece that you can find. I would, if you, try to find them on eBay, I would try to just search for the style you're going for, right? Trying to go double-breasted. But if you want to buy it at a local store, you can find it there too. Or, of course, you go to a tailor and just tell them, hey, what's the heaviest fabric you got? And the advantage of it drapes much nicer, it keeps you warmer, and it doesn't wear out as quickly. That being said, I'm talking to someone in England right now who has specialized in making really heavyweight fabrics. So who knows what comes of it? Stay tuned. I'd love to create a Fort Belvedere overcoat or a range of overcoats that had exactly that material, the weight, the look, and the length that I'm looking for, but I'm having a hard time finding new. What are your thoughts on leather overcoats as a fashion choice? You know, I'm from Germany, so the first association I have in my mind is a Nazi leather overcoat, and it's not a positive thing. So I'm like, oh, that's a little tough. I don't know if you can pull it off. Go for it. Which overcoats are the easiest to maintain? I would say, if you have a large weave herringbone like this, they're pretty sturdy, but because it's a large weave, you could maybe, get some thorns and pick it up, and that's not good. I would say the kind of sturdiest that I have probably is a boiled wool overcoat. It's like a navy one that I bought at Bobby from Boston. Yeah, let me show you here. No, I don't have that one up here right now, but I would say, yeah, boiled wool, finer weave, thicker fabric. That is pretty much really hard wearing. Camel hair overcoats, which are typical for polo overcoats, are very prone to losing their hair at the edges where you find wear. For example, I have one here, and if you look at it, you can see the wear on the edges very, very quickly. They're the original polo coat camel hair coats, and you can see it's kind of flannelly, fluffy, but it just wears out a lot more quickly. So don't get a polo coat in the polo coat material if you want longevity. What's one overcoat that is great to wear every day with pretty much anything? I would say if you want to really kind of, something that is not very flashy, probably single-breasted navy overcoat, maybe dark gray charcoal, maybe a subtle pattern, or like a very subtle herringbone, or some Donegal flex. I think that makes it wearable with anything that's casual, but maybe also with some business type stuff. One of the first ones I had was this one. It was one from Bali, and what I really liked about it was the silhouette. It was cut very slim. Now the fabric is not that heavy, and the other cool feature it had was it had actually side vents, which is not something I've seen in overcoats much ever since, but I wore this when I met my wife, and I love this piece. I still kept it, even though it's a little tight these days. Let me try to put it on. I have a really thick sweater on, so we'll see. Oh yeah, tighten the arm. Yeah, with this sweater, definitely not a go. But you can see it has this kind of hidden fly. I thought at the time that was a very kind of elegant look. You can also have this look in a covered coat, which oftentimes has a contrasting velvet collar, which is, I think, a nice feature because it's contrasting, yet it is in the same color family. So the traditional covered coat has this kind of like more a camel khaki color and then a brown contrasting collar. On a navy coat, it could be like a black velvet collar or something that just offsets it. I think that's a detail that is really nice that, should be seen more often in overcoats. What's a good start overcoat for someone on a budget and new to the sartorial world? Personally, I'm a big fan of double-breasted overcoats because you get that overlaying layer of fabric and it has this kind of military-inspired look. And a lot of people who we know always wear single-breasted suits are okay wearing a double-breasted overcoat because it's a different garment and it makes them feel at ease. I think if you want a stunning piece of overcoat, Kyle had one. It was really nice, kind of an officer-inspired overcoat, double-breasted, lots of button rows, buttoning all the way up, big collar. It's called an Ulster collar. It's basically cut like a peak lapel, but the points don't face up, but they're a little more wider. So it's like a mix of a notched lapel and a peak lapel. You can check out in our other guides what that exactly is. I think that would be a really nice stylistic start if you were on the bolder side. If not, you can go with a single-breasted, a little more muted, or you could get something if your wardrobe is very casual, double-breasted, maybe with patch pockets, and then again the Ulster collar. Fabric-wise, yeah, I think herringbone is a great start. One thing that I really like for kind of business wear is this kind of a material here. You see, this is a gray overcoat, but it has flecks of blue and black in it. So if I was to design an overcoat, I would offer something like that, because that, makes you wearable with gray, blue, black, whatever. So any kind of formal occasion that you could imagine going to, you could cover with that. And if you then had another overcoat like this, with brown and flecks of other colors, basically with these two overcoats, you can cover your entire wardrobe. You don't need to buy more because you don't need to. I mean, if you want to, and I obviously do, then you can do that. But if you just want to have two overcoats, limited room in your closet, that's all that you'll really need. How practical would a cashmere overcoat be, especially longevity-wise? Good question. When I started out with overcoats, I loved cashmere overcoats because, they felt so soft. And I had like Loro Piana cashmere overcoats that I found relatively inexpensively. Over time, I realized, A, they're not that warm and they were too thin. And yes, they wear out more quickly than a really heavy wool overcoat. So ask yourself, how often do I actually wear this thing? Do you live in a climate where you wear an overcoat 3 times a year? Then I think cashmere works. If you live in a climate where it gets really cold 4 months of the year, I'd skip it unless you can find something really thick, which then is also more expensive, and you're willing to replace it more often.
Hey, Raphael, can you move this stuff off the table when you're done with it?
Sure. Do you have to wear an overcoat with the buttons done up, or can it be worn unbuttoned? A double-breasted overcoat always looks better when it's buttoned. I don't think you should ever wear it unbuttoned. A single-breasted overcoat, maybe you can wear unbuttoned, and if you go to Pitti Uomo, you see it all the time, right? Because there, it's really not that cold in January, so having the overcoat would just be too hot, so people intentionally want to show off all their layers. And I think it can work. And hey, if you're sweating in a double-breasted overcoat, unbutton it and get some fresh air. I think that's functionally just totally fine. Look-wise, I like double-breasted buttoned. What do you think about overcoats being created with traditionally summer-based materials with a relatively open weave to aid as an option for summer layering? Frankly, because I don't live in a climate where I would need that, I haven't even considered it. But let's say you live in, Singapore or in the tropics and you want to wear an overcoat during the cold months of the year. Sure, why not? Give it a try. I don't know of any brands that actually do that. That would probably be a custom piece, but sounds interesting. Will an overcoat protect me from the rain if I don't have an umbrella? Depends on the kind of overcoat. There's the traditional trench coat and the way they're treated, the water should pearl off. There's Loro Piana has their storm system and other brands have their stuff. Basically what happens is I think they treat the yarn with kind of a Scotch Guard water repellent thing. I think over time it wears off. Even like your, performance jacket that you wear skiing or expeditioning, usually you have to reapply this water repellency. Could you put it on some wool? Yeah, you can. I found that, when I wear a heavy overcoat, it's going to snow. It's not going to rain. And if it snows, the snow just stays on top of it. It doesn't really melt until I go in. If you are at, let's say, 1 degree Celsius or 34 degrees Fahrenheit, and it's raining and your entire coat is wet, yeah, it's probably not ideal if it's made out of wool. Do you expect a cotton gabardine raincoat to withstand prolonged heavy rain? I don't. It's not waterproof. It's not like a Macintosh that is like truly rubberized. But what I've found is that if you have a truly waterproof garment on the outside, like a Macintosh, you just start sweating from the inside. So the final result is that you're wet from the inside as well. Yeah, so that's something always to consider. What's the breathability of the garment and how waterproofed is it and what's the level of waterproofing? My older Burberry trench coats are totally fine if it rains a little bit, but prolonged rain exposure, I haven't done that because I typically have an umbrella, or I just try to not stand in the rain because I don't enjoy it. But I'd have to try it. Where would you recommend to get good tweed? Well, the Outer Hebrides, Scotland have great tweed. That's where it's originally from. The finish sometimes may be a little, stiffer, but I liked it about tweed. I think it's really lovely. There are other mills in England. There's also like Italian tweed. I wouldn't call it tweed, but it's, the idea is behind it, that it's a very similar fabric, maybe with a softer finish and a slightly different look and color combinations. Would you ever consider opening a store in Minnesota? When I started the Gentleman's Gazette and when we started selling product, I never wanted to be in a store myself because I felt like standing there and just waiting for people to come felt like a total waste of time. Now, I like the idea of having a space where people can come in and try on things and talk about it. I think we would rather do that in a setting where it's very intentional, right? Where you have workshops and it's a scheduled time and people come in groups and do that rather than just like a regular store. Would we open a store? Not if I would have to stand in it. If we're at a point, where we can have multiple layers of management and someone else deals with it, maybe. I wonder if, people here would be interested, the market would sustain it. This is more of like, people have Canada Goose and stuff like that, more like casual clothes. So, I don't know. Never say never, but I'm not planning on it. Or we're not planning on it at this point. Is there a correct way to wear a long overcoat? I know that they should reach to about the knee, but I also like ones that extend further downwards. I mentioned Hercule Poirot. Check out how he wears it. He has the kind of single-breasted coat. He sometimes wears it slightly opened, but it hangs really nicely all the way down. I think if it puddles, if there's too much material, you get these kind of puddles or the wavy look. Personally, I don't think that looks nice. If you have a heavy fabric and it fits you quite well, it should drape very nicely along on your body. And yeah, knee length is about the length that I like. I like it past my knee because it keeps me warmer. Ankle length is when you're truly long. I think there's this guy by the name of Maximilian Mogg. He's a German, has a very kind of inspired style by like Edward Saxton, kind of in that realm. And he, if you check out his Instagram, you can see kind of his silhouette. I met him once at PT Uomo, and he was wearing sneakers all the time. So I talked to him and was like, well, I got blisters, so, I wear my white sneakers with everything. I was like, oh, get it. I thought it was a style choice. Yeah. Any suggestions for what type of overcoat to wear for those who cannot afford a designated evening overcoat? Yeah, that's hard. Evening overcoat, in case you don't know what that is. This is an evening overcoat. One form of it. It has like satin silk lapels, just like a tuxedo has. And this is lined entirely in silk. It has this double button in the front, so the buttoning point is really low, so you see a lot of the front of the tuxedo and the deep cut V or the white tie. There's variations of evening coats, and they're really cool. And there was this gentleman by the name of Hermann Martin Baron von Elking, who wrote lots of books about clothing, and he says the state of elegance of a society is reflected by the amount of evening overcoats people have. Now, as this question points out, oftentimes people don't want to invest in an extra piece that has to be custom made. So I'd say double-breasted navy paletot overcoat that, it's dark, but you can wear it with a regular business suit, you can wear it with a tweed suit, you can wear it with khakis or chinos, is probably the best substitute in my mind. What do you think of faux fur overcoats as opposed to real fur? I really don't like them. I don't like the fake fur. It's all just polyester based. I don't think it's environmentally friendly. I get it if you're into animal protection, animal rights, that you don't want to wear fur. I live in Minnesota here, and for the longest time, beavers weren't trapped. Now they are harvested again because there are just so many of them, and it creates issues for the ecosystem, for humans. And I get, you could say, well, the humans, the beavers were there first, and I get that, but I would say, yeah, fur, it's really nice. And for men, if you don't want that flashy look and that kind of pimp association, I think having a fur lining is really, really nice. I have a few fur overcoats. Here's one of them. I think that's a hare. It's really nice, but it's also after a while it's shedding, and fur is just, ideally you keep it at a furrier because they have a humidifier, so they make sure that the pelt doesn't dry out. Otherwise, I think for men like nutria or beaver is really nice and extremely warm, but don't get it unless you live in a really cold climate, otherwise you just overheat. What are the most essential, maybe 3 to 5 overcoats a gentleman should have in their wardrobe? Okay, so if I had, money was of no concern and I could just go to town, I would get this navy paletot overcoat, solid in a wool fabric, double-breasted. Then I would get a gray overcoat, something like I showed you before. Like this, definitely with velvet collar, also double-breasted. I would get one single-breasted coat that would be like a covered coat with a brown velvet collar, single-breasted, hidden fly. And then I would get a Donegal tweed, herringbone overcoat. I would also get it double-breasted with patch pockets. And I would try to change the styles, right? So if I have maybe a center pleat in the back and a half belt, I'll try to maybe get another coat with a belt. Just so I have at least one belt, one half belt, one with no belt at all. And when you go out and buy stuff, you may not be able to choose those details, but rather than having, always a belted overcoat, add variety. That's something that I like. Of course, you could also argue maybe I want to be the guy who always has belted overcoats. If that's what you want, go for it. But those would be my picks. How do you going to store a wool overcoat in the off-season? Frankly, you don't have to do anything special to store them. You can just leave them on a hanger. I usually, brush them off, get the dust out, and try to let them hang them outside so they can just air out. When I get, sometimes when I buy an older overcoat, at first when I get it, it has this kind of musty smell. So take a spray bottle and put in vodka. No particular brand, can be cheaper stuff. I always get triple filtered Kirkland stuff in a big bottle for cheap and just spray it on it heavily. And I don't know what it is, but it's probably alcohol going in it, grasping it, and then it kind of evaporates, but it really helps to eliminate the odor, probably kills off all the stuff. So I do that in combination. So I hang it outside, I spray it really so it's damp with the alcohol, but it evaporates pretty quickly. And I do it probably 2 or 3 times, and I smell every time until it just stops smelling, and then I'm done. But once you're at a point where your overcoat doesn't smell anymore, you just hang it, maybe put it in a garment bag that is somewhat breathable so it doesn't just collect dust on top of it. And then when you take it out, brush it off again and wear it for the season. Maybe check, if buttons have come loose. That typically happens to me, then re-sew those. What are your thoughts on body coats? Close-fitting coats meant to be worn over a shirt, but not a jacket. Good question. There's actually the traditional frock coat, which was a garment, that was worn. It was a body coat, just like a morning coat or a white-tie tailcoat. And you can always see that it's a body coat if you look at the back and the way the seams go. They're angled, or not angled, they're curved. And oftentimes they have these two buttons in the back and then like a hook vent. And that's the hallmark of this kind of close-fitting body coat. The closest I have to an overcoat like that was the... see here, where is it? This one here, I showed you earlier. It's just cut in a very trim way. You can see in the back here the pattern is not particularly, it's just in a seam here at the end. Maybe hold it like this so you can see it better. Yeah, you can see the pattern better. It's just the center seam. A typical body coat has another seam here and another seam here. You don't have that here. What do I think of it? For me personally, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense because I live in a climate that is colder. I think if it was a little warmer and you like this idea of the frock coat without a jacket, a sweater, and just a shirt, and that's the look you want, why not try it? Not the right thing for me. Are there times when you shouldn't wear a camel hair overcoat versus a dark one? Yes. So, traditionally, like wearing a camel hair overcoat with a tuxedo is totally off. Or wearing a camel hair overcoat with a business suit, right? Totally off. Now, that being said, in this day and age, if you wear an overcoat at all, your head's and shoulders above everyone else. And if that's your style and you're just like, hey, I wear my polo coat with everything, right? I've met a guy once from Austria. He would wear his duffel coat. Here's an example in green. I think his was like dark blue, but it has toggles, right? And it has a hood. And he would wear that with his black tie ensemble. And that was just him, right? It was just his quirk and his style. It's not classic at all, but you can still wear it and pull it off. Maybe, from close aficionados, they'll look at you and it's like, hey, what are you wearing here? But most people will just look at it and they're like, oh, wow, cool, that's a bold overcoat. So it depends on the level of comfort you have with being the center of attention, I would say. Yeah. The Lodenmantel is a staple piece of Austrian traditional overcoats, but it is heavy and warm. I've trouble pairing it with classic menswear. What do I do? The Lodenmantel is great. So Loden is an Australian material made from animal hair, but unlike a woven fabric, it's like felted, like a hat. And what happens there, like hair, is just intertwined in a way through friction that it just doesn't come apart anymore. It's like when you have, let's say, dreadlocks, right? Your hair is just so intertwined, nothing comes apart anymore. And that's the part of Loden. It's, I think, a perfectly classic piece. Sometimes the coats, they have like very casual antler horn buttons and a very kind of Tyrolean, or which is northern Italy bordering with Austria kind of look. But I think it can be worn with classic menswear, and I'd love to, make a Fort Belvedere Loden overcoat that is heavier, and because it's a nice material, it's sturdy, it's hard wearing, it's warm, it's great. Just make sure you utilize typical color combination and pattern rules, and you'll be fine. Where is your tennis sweater from? This is actually a vintage Polo Ralph Lauren version. It says it's hand knitted. I don't think they do this anymore. And the funny thing is that there's no Polo logo on there anywhere, but you can see in the back here, it says Polo. It's really heavy, and I like tennis or cricket sweaters, and I have a bunch of them. This one has this kind of maroonish brown, yellow, and green color combination. Nothing here on the sleeves or nothing here at the bottom. What's the heaviest overcoat you've seen? The heaviest overcoat I've held weighs, I think, close to 5 kilograms, which is 11 pounds. How do you recommend storing a camel overcoat in the summer, leaving on a hanger or fold it in a gardening bag? I would definitely never fold it, because if you fold something over long periods of time, you're much more likely to experience crease lines, especially in a material like the camel hair. I would just say get a hanger that has a slightly wider shoulder pad. This one here is, I think, from Butler Luxury. This one is just like, a regular store brand white one. Try to avoid the shirt hangers. That being said, if you have a very small closet, I've definitely hung jackets on slimmer hangers. Try to avoid the ones you get from the dry cleaner, which are just like the wire hangers. Go with something a little wider. Otherwise, the risk you may have is that if you store something for a while on your hanger, like this coat here, which has been on a while, if you take it out and you put it on a different one now, maybe what you get to see is a little bump in here, like a mark from the hanger. If you ever experienced that, you can just take an iron, put a layer of cotton cloth over and iron over it, and it should be fine. So it's not this dramatic deal, but that's how I would store it. Of course, if you only have those wide hangers, you can fit probably half the amount of clothes in your closet or in your armoire or wardrobe than you could if you had slimmer hangers. So you have to balance that. How much space do I have? How many clothes do I have? What kind of hangers can I use? Do you think the style will change for retailers to stock longer overcoats again? I'm tired of the shorter, trendy-looking coats. Jack and Preston feel the same way. Ultimately, I think most retailers or brands have to look at the numbers, and it has to look economically viable. I think there is this one brand called Thomas Farthing. It's a British brand. I really like their aesthetic. Their stuff, they're from England, but I think they make their stuff in Portugal. And they're very vintage inspired, right? Very kind of period accurate. They take like 20 suits and 30 suits and remake them in modern day, manufacturing facilities. But you get that distinct look. And I think they have long overcoats. So maybe check them out. I placed an order there, but then they were out of stock of something, so I haven't tested it out. So it's not first-hand experience. It's just something that I've seen. That's a brand that really says, that's the look we're going for. We're appealing to this vintage 1930s niche. Most other brands, Spear McCare, whatever, they are like, hey, we want to sell something, and, it's legitimate to say, well, if people want to buy this, then I produce this. Of course, you could argue, like, Steve Jobs, sometimes you have to create something, and then people don't know that they want it, and then they finally want it. In fashion, typically, you see trends, right? You see single-breasted jackets with more buttons and fewer buttons. So I could see that maybe there's going to be a trend where longer overcoats are stylish again. You see 90s stuff coming back now, or 90s stuff or 90s inspired stuff. There's always, fashion is like a cycle, so to speak. And while it's never exactly 100% the same, a lot of it is really picked up. I see women now wearing wide-legged jeans. For the longest time, they were always these skinny, jeggings type jeans. Well, now it's very different. And for men, it's similar too. I think the more people just wear older or longer overcoats at PTO probably, the more likely it's going to be that we have that back in style. What's your favorite overcoat, either in your own collection or in general? Boy, that's a hard one. I think my favorite is the vintage evening overcoat for the sole reason that it's so special. And if you check out our black tie guide, we show you the different types of evening overcoats you can have. I just have this one, but I would say, yeah, my favorite for that reason. What do you think about cloaks and capes as an alternative to an overcoat? I don't know many people who wear them. One of them is Henrik Kjell. He's also known as Butler on like Style Forum and other places. And he always wears one. At PTO, I definitely took some shots of him. He always likes it. There was always a guy by the name of Miguel Vieira. He's from Portugal, and he once made up a traditional Portuguese kind of cape overcoat. I don't think he was able to, sell a ton of them. I don't even know if he makes them anymore, but I thought it was a cool kind of take on things, right? I mean, Sherlock Holmes had them, the kind of pelerine on top. I think it works functionally. Personally, I've never kind of ventured into it, probably because I never found something that actually fit me. If I had one, I would probably wear it extremely rarely. Just not entirely my style. But wearable and, it's definitely a hallmark piece. A conversation starter. What is the best overcoat for morning wear? For a stroller, I would say like a charcoal, and it could be a dark herringbone or just solid. I would say double-breasted again, black or charcoal with a velvet collar would I think be really nice. For a morning coat, to be honest, I've never seen an ensemble where someone wore a overcoat over the morning coat, because you wouldn't see anything in the morning coat at all. So that would be an interesting look, but it would be the same style, so to speak. I actually, maybe Chris can get that here in the camera. I think it hangs over there. It's a vintage black overcoat that I bought on eBay. It's double-breasted. It's very heavy. It has this velvet collar. And when I got it, I was like, wow. Maybe in the other room. Yeah, we have lots of places here where we store all of our things. But it was a really cool thing because I got the coat and was like, wow, the stitch density on the collar was extremely high. And, then it was like it was made in the 30s. And in the pocket, I found a little card that said, with the best New Year's wishes. And it was, the 31st of December, 1938. And it in Germany, 1939 is when the World War really started for them there, for the population. So I was like, wow, this was at the very tail end of when things got really bad. And this piece survived, right? And I was thinking about, what if this person wearing this, was a Nazi who killed Jews, or maybe they were someone who were suppressed by the regime. And it was interesting, there were lots of feelings that came up, but the garment itself was of exceptional quality. And one thing I really liked about it, and if Chris can find it, I'll show it to you. Otherwise, we'll show it at a different time. It had these buttons that had almost like little carved lines, and they really... Oh, there we go. Thank you, Chris. Mm-hmm. So you can see here, first of all, really cool lining. It has this kind of ripped twill lining that is shiny. Then you have the velvet collar, really nice peak lapels, and the buttons are just really cool. They have this kind of scorched surface that reflects the light in a different way. I hope you can see it here. What do you think, Chris?
As long as you hold it close to your face,
Oh.
you should be able to see it.
Okay, yeah. It kind of has that effect, which I think for morning wear is really elegant and cool. Yeah, but this one has flaps. If you want something that is more formal, you can go without flaps. But typically they're tailored so you can also tuck them in, so you can get both looks if you want. That is always nice. So yeah, this is a 1930s overcoat. And I mean, you can see the stitch density here, but it's just very, very nice. Do you opt for full or half canvas when it comes to overcoats? Frankly, the old ones, they're all full canvas. There's no difference. The only reason you would go for half canvas is really for price, and you would typically do it on a new thing. So maybe I would say, if you go that route to go custom and you do something, just save up a little more and get that full canvas piece. In frozen Minnesota, any thoughts on sheepskin? I think sheepskin jackets, like flight jackets kind of look cool. For overcoats, I don't know, they have this kind of, more like of a hipster vibe to me. Not something that I would wear. What's the proper way to sit with an overcoat? Do you bring the tails up and sit in your pants, or do you sit on the coat? Good question, because in a white tie tailcoat, what you do is you'd stand, you flip your tails, and then you sit not on the tails. With an overcoat, oftentimes the vent, if it has a vent, is not long enough to do that, so you just sit on it. It's also not as delicate, but yeah, good question. Knowing that on a morning coat or white tie tailcoat, you wouldn't sit on them, but they're meant to really come apart. For a traditional overcoat like here, it's not that long. It's hard to really do that. Is an overcoat appropriate for an under 18-year-old boy, or can you wear them at any age? My 4-year-old daughter is wearing overcoats. There's really no reason to limit it to any age. Does a covered coat have to be always made from covered cloth, or do tweed or heavy fabrics work also? I mean, traditionally, that's what you see it made out of most often, but frankly, I don't see a reason why you couldn't make it out of anything else. If you like the silhouette, if you like the style, typically it's a notch lapel. Sometimes I see it with a peak lapel, and with a fly button front. It's a very kind of clean-looking coat. No reason you couldn't make that in other fabrics. Any recommendations for a decent overcoat under 500 pounds? New? I don't know. Like I said, I haven't checked out the Thomas Farding ones. I don't know if they're under 500 pounds. You can maybe it's new. You can probably exchange it if you don't like it. I would check that. Otherwise, I would used for sure. You can find. I mean, I've never spent more than 500 pounds on any overcoat. Because they're not super popular, oftentimes you can find them at a much lower price. So it's usually not a budget thing. If you're willing to find something secondhand, and oftentimes they're completely unworn too, so you can find new old stock. If you get something from the 30s, it's going to be super heavy. I mean, because it's just how they used to make them. What overcoats are good for very cold weather around 0 degrees, which is 32 Fahrenheit, or maybe lower? Just thick, heavy overcoats. I mean, this morning here, I think it's like about 14 Fahrenheit, which is -10. And I don't even wear my heaviest overcoats during that weather. But in my Is It Worth It Canada Goose video, I was like comparing those jackets against my heaviest overcoats. And the heaviest overcoats kept me just as warm. So, yeah, plain old wool will do it. For extra cold, you can do this. You can have a lining. This is I think a mink lining, so it's extremely soft. And yeah, super warm. And particularly what you can also get with fur for a lining is you can get fur where the top hair is ripped out or plucked. So what you're left with is just that fine under hair. I've seen it done once on beaver fur here from Minnesota, and it's just supremely soft. They make it into like blankets or pillows or jacket linings. Pretty awesome. I'm extra slim. Any advice on how to find less roomy overcoats? Perhaps Preston can weigh in. Yeah, I hear you. Overcoats in general, I know they're most of the time kind of a little more roomy because they're meant to be worn over a jacket. In that case, I would say, go to your alterations tailor and have them add darts. You can add darts in the front. And typically they're already there and in the back. When I used to study, I remember I had a guy who studied with me. He would always have these super trim tailored overcoats that almost couldn't be buttoned, but he wore them like that. So there, you can always definitely tailor them down. It's going to cost you a little more, and even if you score an overcoat for $100 or $200 vintage, you'll still have to spend as much or more in the alterations process. Could you help explain the different types and the differences? I hear things like pea coat, overcoat, but it can be confusing. Well, we have dedicated pieces about all these different options on our website. We even have a post that explains the differences. So overcoat is something out of a heavy material, like a wool, cashmere. Top coat is the same out of a lighter material. Let's say a trench coat, for example. Pea coat is a specific model. It's a shorter coat. It has a maritime heritage, and for example, Navy officers still have pea coats. And then depending on what position you have, some have gold buttons, others have plain navy buttons, so you can differentiate there. But I would say, go to our top coat and overcoat category, check out the different ones. We talk about what is a paletot, what makes a paletot, what makes a Ulster overcoat, all and the different hallmarks and what it is, so you get a better understanding. It would be a lot to just recite them here, especially since we already did that. And we also did specific overcoat videos where we touch on that too and explain everything. Are modern day overcoats good or bad? You can make great overcoats now, just like you could 100 years ago. I find that most overcoats that are modern are not to my liking because they don't have that nice heavy fabric. But could that be done? Absolutely. So I don't think it's necessarily a modern day issue. It's just it's not being done right now. Recommendation of wearing a suit and overcoat of similar color or pattern. Yeah, you can definitely do that. I mean, you could even have a matching overcoat out of a matching fabric. Think of it, you have a three-piece suit with a matching fabric overcoat. Would be pretty cool. That being said, most overcoats are made of a heavier fabric than your suit material, intentionally so. So there will always be some difference. And most people will not have, the budget to have one overcoat for each of their suits. So it's okay to get some others. And like I said, if you have a fabric that has these multiple color tones, it always looks like it works together and it was meant to be together, even though it wasn't. Recommendation, should you leave your suit's boutonniere at home when wearing an overcoat? I'm worried the overcoat would smash it. Yes, definitely an issue. I've made a mistake, put on the boutonniere on my overcoat, then put the overcoat on it. It's smashed. So what I learned I can do is if my overcoat has a buttonhole, I can just transfer it from my jacket into the overcoat and then back when I take off the overcoat. It's a little bit of work, but that way you can actually wear the boutonniere. If your overcoat doesn't have a buttonhole, I just skip wearing the boutonniere because otherwise it's just squished. Yeah. What season would be most suitable for an overcoat? Summer and tropics. Best overcoat recommendation for the city? Yeah, it depends on your style, right? For me, a city overcoat, something like this is pretty awesome, right? It has this kind of gray, blue, black collar, double-breasted. This is an old Chesterberry. I think that's awesome. What's the difference between top coats and overcoats? It's the material. Top coat, like trench coat, is just lighter. And we have an entire video about that. How do you match an overcoat with your outfit? A good question. Typically, overcoats have oversized patterns, like this one here. It's just a much larger herringbone that you would typically find on a suit, with the idea in mind that your suit has smaller patterns. So this is a bigger pattern. It's a thicker fabric, maybe in a coarser weave, so it automatically pairs well because the scale of the pattern is different. But the general rules of pattern matching apply. If you have a chalk stripe suit, don't go with a chalk stripe overcoat with the same spacing. It will look weird because the colors are not exactly the same. The material is slightly thicker, and it just looks off. Because most people, even if they have 10 suits, they may just have 2 or 3 overcoats. It pays to stick with basics at first, right? Don't get the Prince of Wales check overcoat or the large plaid. I mean, it may look cool, it's a cool overcoat, and maybe you can pull it off, but most people will probably be happier with the plain navy paletot overcoat at first than something in, green. I've never worn a proper overcoat as I use a bike to travel. What overcoat would be best for me as a bike user? I would say go with a pea coat or anything that's fairly short, because with a bike you don't want the tips of the overcoat to get into your wheels and throw you off the bike. You want something that covers you, but when you sit, will work on your bike's saddle. What are your opinions on Brooks Brothers overcoats? Frankly, I don't own any. I've never come across one that I liked, so no opinion. What's the best overcoat for a 1940s style outfit? I suggest you check out the video about 1940s style that we made. But looking back at photos and illustrations, yeah, they're double-breasted. They can be single-breasted, heavy fabrics. Sometimes people like a raglan style. It existed back then. Personally, I'm not the biggest fan of raglan sleeves. And by raglan, I mean a sleeve where most traditional sleeves are attached here. A raglan sleeve is cut where there's no seam here and the seam is here, and it goes all the way over. The traditional trench coat, for example, has this raglan sleeve, and you can find more about it on the website. I find my range of movement is somewhat limited with them, so I'm not a huge fan of them. What's the ideal length of an overcoat's sleeves? Good question. We have a guide to sleeve lengths, which is mostly about shirt sleeve length and jacket sleeve length. That's where you want to show cuffs. So let's say this is my sleeve here, and shirt would end here where my sweater ends. Jacket would end anywhere from 0.5 centimeter to 2 centimeters, or 1/5 of an inch to 1/4 of an inch, depending on how much cuff you want to show. Ideally, that corresponds with what you have on your neck. And the overcoat should ideally cover both, right? So you ideally don't want to see any of the shirt or any of the sweater. It should be long enough to cover both. Now, you don't want it to be here, right in your thumb, but you want it to be between in your shirt and your thumb when you kind of stand still like that. What's your favorite overcoat featured in a movie or TV show? The most memorable one is probably Chalky White from Boardwalk Empire. He would have orange window pane overcoats. They definitely stood out, and I remember those. Otherwise, sometimes you have subtler versions. You watch maybe in Hercule Poirot, you find stuff, or British period dramas. They do a very good job of, and sometimes you're like, oh wow, that's a really cool overcoat. I particularly like the ones that are have a wider overlap. In the 30s, both suits and overcoats had a wider overlap. In the 20s, sometimes overcoats also had something like an extra button on the side. So if you check out photos of Rudolf Valentino in his overcoats, he had really cool stuff. I also like, vintage overcoats that have maybe a fur collar, a fur shawl collar. I think that looks really cool. Yeah, lots of different ones that are interesting and not just run-of-the-mill. How should an overcoat fit? Well, typically, like I said, they're all kind of a little roomier because ideally people think you wear a suit underneath of it. So for that to work, you need sleeves that accommodate that, right? Earlier I wore this suit here, this overcoat here, and this was tailored like you can't wear a suit underneath of that. It's not gonna work. So to understand how you want to wear your overcoat, or how you mostly want to wear it, when in doubt, make sure you have space for a suit underneath of it. But if you like your things tailored, you can do it like the guy I went to law school with, and have everything really trimly tailored. Then, of course, if you have a big lunch, maybe you get X wrinkles when you try to button it. That's something you have to keep in mind. Personally, I like an overcoat to be not too tightly fitting, but I like the options of either half belts that are adjustable or full belts, because it gives you that hourglass look, and it's adjustable. Otherwise, it may be good to have two different options in your closet. Right? One that is a little wider, where you can wear stuff underneath of it, and one that's maybe more meant for a slim sweater. So that gives you options. What's the lightest yet warmest material for an overcoat? Lightest and warmest. I've seen a material that was made out of down feathers, that was made like a fabric, but it was more meant as a layer in between, not as something that's on the outside or the inside. I think it would be very lightweight. There's, alpaca, which is just the fiber itself, has air inside of it, the hair, and so it's more insulating than just plain wool. It is heavier though. Yeah. So I don't know, lightness in an overcoat was never something that I aspired for, because I like the weight, because the weight makes it drape nicely and look good. So if you want light and warm, probably down jackets are your best bet. But I find them pretty ugly, so I don't wear that. What's the function of the inner button on an overcoat? Good question. I believe the function is that first of all, it's stronger because you have 2 points where things are buttoned rather than one. Also, it can help to keep the look of the lapels aligned, especially in a double-breasted overcoat, which is where you only see the double button. Sometimes you find a button, 2 buttons even, 1, 2, and if you button it the incorrect way, you can see your lapel shapes all of a sudden look off. Because if, let's say, I button this button down here, further down, the lapel gets bigger, and so the visible part on this side is bigger than on this, and it just looks off. So I think the button helps that the lapels look symmetrical when you wear them, and it reinforces the whole mechanism. Oh, my questions here disappeared for a second. Okay, yeah, so thanks for all the great questions. We're switching over to our Patreon stream now, and let's see what